Hello, and welcome to the Rainbow Club, a podcast for queer people to find their love, support, and validation. Join me, your host, Nathan Major, for this introductory episode, where I explore my own story of coming to terms with my sexuality and lay out my aims and goals for the following months and hopefully years of podcasting. Stick around to take some knowledge. Hello, and welcome to the Rainbow Club. As the intro said, my name's Nathan, and I'll be your host / guide through this world of LGBTQ life, I suppose. So I suppose I'll start by explaining what this is. Sorry if you hear that sound in the background, that's my squeaky chair. I need to get some WD-40 on that quickly. Here a while back, while listening to a podcast by the brilliant Susie Ruffle called Out, where she speaks to her fellow queer friends in comedy and in entertainment about their experiences of being LGBTQ and their stories, and I thought that was a really interesting concept. It's a podcast that I really recommend alongside this one maybe, and I thought it would be just as interesting, if not more so, to speak to I don't want to say like unknown people, but people that aren't necessarily famous and don't have the public profile that Susie's guests do. So I've spoken to a few of my friends to get them on board to talk about their stories, basically. And I thought I would start, before I throw everybody else in the deep end and sort of without a net and try and help them through their stories, that it would only be fair if I told mine to start us off with. And this is me sort of recording without a net. I haven't got a script or anything. I don't record with a script because I like what I say and what my guests say to feel natural. Those who've listened to my other podcast, the Major Film Reviews podcast, will know that occasionally sometimes sounds like I'm unprepared. I mean, probably because I am unprepared sometimes. But I like these chats to sort of feel off the cuff and natural, and that's... So who am I, first off? That might be a good question, because I'm not famous. I don't have a public profile. I suppose I might have a few listeners that used to listen to my old Major Film Reviews podcasts when I used to review films. That was my sort of main profile online for a while, and then about a year ago I started losing my vision, so that sort of hampered my film reviewing and put a stop to that. So now I'm sort of... I'll say that I'm a writer for now. I'm a writer because I've got a few things on the go, and which is something that all writers say. They've always got some things on the go, but nothing you would have probably have read. I'm not... I wouldn't say I was qualified to talk about the really difficult subjects. I'm just a friendly ear, if you like, to guide people through their journey. So I shall start off by letting you know how I identify. So I identify as a cis man and as a gay man. And I'm hoping to start every podcast by asking my guests to as clearly as they can say what their identity is. So that sets out a nice starting point for us to talk. And it also helps me to remember which pronouns to use, because my memory's not that great. So, my story, where does it begin? Probably when I was at school. When I was really young, actually, like primary school age, I did sort of notice that while other boys were fancying girls and sort of chasing them around, I wouldn't say that I actively knew, but there was always sort of something there that told me that I wasn't all that interested in that. That might have just been because I was sort of a later developer than other boys my age. That is entirely plausible. But it could also have been the start of who I am now. I certainly did start to notice when I was in secondary school that I was attracted to lads as well as lasses. At the time, and for a long time, I identified as bisexual, which is a pretty regular story for a gay man. I'm sure you've all heard the saying "bi now, gay later." Well, that stereotype turned out to be true for me. So I thought I was bisexual at school, and because essentially I thought that was bad enough in the eyes of someone trying to get through school without being too badly harassed. And I'm not going to say that it was easy. I did come out like publicly in the eyes of people as bisexual when I was still at school in my last year, when I was sort of 15, 16, and I did get some trouble from it with the kids, which I was expecting, really, because it was a school in a relatively rough area of council estate, and those things happened. Being gay was still very much used as an insult during break times and lunch times at schools, which I'm sure, having worked in schools in the past few years, it's sadly still occasionally used now, but it was a lot more widespread when I was at school. I left school 10 years ago, for reference, so it's not really all that long in some people's perspective, so I suppose I could have had it worse, but it was still there. There was a few lads and a couple of lasses too who also identified as either bi, gay or lesbian for the girls, who were in sort of various stages of being out. There was a few who would sort of, after I'd come out, would come up and tell me, that they also thought they had feelings for lads too, but they were too scared to say it. And one of which was a friend of mine who sat next to me in Signs, who I suppose ended up being my first boyfriend, if you like. It was more like a school fling than a boyfriend thing, and we're still good friends today. So I'm not going to mention any names for fear of embarrassing him, and for hope that he may one day come on this podcast and talk about his own story. I don't know, but that certainly definitely started my journey off into exploring who I was properly. The main thing to know about me when I was at school, especially in my sort of the mid to late years of school, is that I was very shy, and still am. I have a lot of social anxiety based around a lot of experiences at school that weren't necessarily positive. I was bullied quite a lot at school even before I came out, for various reasons. You will notice across the period of the podcast that I have a stutter, so I will occasionally trip over words, and that will affect the podcast because I'm not good enough at audio editing to edit out my stutters, and I really can't be arsed. So that's just how I speak, and I think it would send the wrong message to people if I did try and edit that out. So that was something else that was sort of picked up on at school and used as a stick to beat me with, if you like. But because I was so quiet and withdrawn and socially awkward, it meant that I didn't meet many people at all. I didn't have many partners when I was younger. When I was 15, 16, I didn't have any school girlfriends while I was still dating women, dating girls at the time, because I was at school. I just simply wasn't that popular, wasn't that confident, and that carried over into college. At that time, I'd sort of stayed quiet about my sexuality. I'd learned at school that being open about it got me a lot more trouble than it was worth. So I wasn't necessarily back in the closet. If anyone asked, I would tell them that I was, but it wasn't something I was going around saying loudly and proudly at the time that I identified as bisexual then, which in hindsight, once I got to college, was quite ridiculous because I was on a musical theatre course, which, just to fit the stereotype, was very LGBTQ friendly, shall we say. Not to say that there wasn't any straight guys on the course, because there was, and that there were bisexual guys and gay guys and all sorts of people who fell under the LGBTQ rainbow, and it was that essentially got me to open up a bit more, because I felt more of a connection to these people that I went to college with, especially because they actually seemed to like my company, as opposed to people at school who would just sort of either pretend I didn't exist or actively encourage me to go away, I think is probably the best way of putting it. And so once I got to college, I started being a lot more of a social creature. I experimented a little bit more. I'm a bit wary of going into too much detail, because I don't want it to be that sort of... Basically, I'm trying to protect anyone that I know from hearing details about me that they would much rather they didn't know, essentially. But as far as it relates to the podcast, this is a very sort of sex-positive space. Should any of the guests wish to discuss any of that, I'm not against discussing it myself, but as I say, who knows who's listening? Probably some people who would much rather not hear about my sexual escapades when I was 18 or 19. And I know that I'm pretty much not keen on talking about it myself, because I think another important part to bear in mind about myself then was, because I was so inexperienced, and because I was sort of sexually repressed too, I don't think I was necessarily the nicest person to be around at that time. And it's something that I'm very conscious of now when I'm talking to people about this kind of thing, is that a lot of people really aren't comfortable with it, and that's fine. Just because this is a sex positive space doesn't mean that everyone will want to talk about that, and that will be something that will differ from guest to guest, and differs for me from day to day, really, because there is nothing I've done that I would necessarily change. I would change the way I behaved at certain times and how I behave towards people, but the experiences that I had, I wouldn't change it, and I don't necessarily regret. I'm not in any rush to repeat them now. I'm older and wiser, but I think that's really what your teenage years are for, is for that experimentation, and I sort of found that in college and in sort of the aftermath of that, if you like, when I first went to uni. And that's when I first started having serious relationships, I suppose you would call them, when I was around 16 or 17. Predominantly with women at first, before I sort of finally realised more about myself than what I could and probably should have realised earlier. And as I say, due to I was very sort of unexperienced at the start, and probably a bit of a nightmare to be with, I'm not going to lie. But all of these experiences now inform in some way who I am and how I behave towards people, because I had a lot of bad stuff in the past that happened to me when it comes to personal stuff that, again, I don't really want to discuss here, and I don't want to be that person. I don't want to be a person that has made someone uncomfortable. And now that I'm older and, well, wiser is debatable, but now that I'm older, I'm very conscious of trying to make the people that I'm in contact with as comfortable as possible, and that wasn't always necessarily the case. I was a bit of a I was trying to give off this illusion that I knew what I was talking about and I knew what I was doing, when really I didn't. I had no idea. I had no idea who I was, let alone how to deal with other people. So and a lot of that reflected in my relationships at the time. I was never really in anything too long term. From the ages of 16 to 19. And then when I was 19, I met a woman who I was then with for almost 5 years, which was, at that point, was like from 19 to, let's see, what's then, 24, I was just after I was 24, and so that was like a big chunk of what has already been my adult life. I was with this woman who I won't name because she deserves her privacy, and I suppose in a lot of ways she wouldn't want that anyway. But I was with her for 5 years, and I really thought at the time that I was that I found the right person, whilst also dealing with the fact that internally I knew that I really wasn't, and I'd known for a long time, but I had a fear of hurting people, and I had this feeling that other people's emotions and other people's happiness was more important than mine. So I persevered for a long time, hid who I really was. It turned out not all that successfully, as it happens, because she realised herself in the end, and it was her that forced me out the closet, as it were. It wasn't nice for her, I'm sure, and I don't have any bad feelings towards her at all. I have only positive feelings about the relationship that we had as well, because I think that relationship did a lot to make me a lot more mature and make me the person that I am today. And I think that without that, I would have struggled with this for a lot longer. But at the time, I was trying to repress all that and make sure that I was keeping that repressed, because I wanted her to be happy, and I wanted us to be together so she could get what she wanted, and which was like marriage and children and things like that. But in retrospect, when you look back on these things, you realise that not only is that really bad for yourself, but it's really difficult for the person that you're with as well. And I realised now how difficult it must have been for her, and even though I know it was difficult for me to have to deal with this sort of internal struggle, but it was her that actually brought me out of the closet in the end. She sort of forced me to admit who I really was, and if I regret anything about those years, then that is what I regret. I regret not being brave enough to realise it myself, and to be able to tell her myself on the many opportunities I had to do so. I thought I was doing the right thing at the time by wanting to make her happy, but in hindsight, and as we know, hindsight is 20/20, it just ended up making it more difficult, because she then had to sort of drag me kicking and screaming out of the closet, and then she must have realised that it was never going to work before that too. So I don't necessarily know how long it played on her mind. I know that it'd been playing on my mind for a while, but it must have been really difficult for her to do what she did, and to be able to come to that realisation, and to force me to do the right thing was not fair on her. And as I say, I don't regret the relationship. I don't feel bad for coming to terms with who I am and living now how the life I always should have been leading. But I am sorry and regretful that it took someone else's suffering and hardship for me to do that. I'm sorry for the 5 years of her life where she could have been finding a person to settle down with and start a family when she thought that was me. And I'm sorry that I couldn't be that for her. And as I have always felt since the moment it happened, the first thing on my mind was to be sorry to her because I couldn't be who she wanted to be. I wasn't happy necessarily at the time that I could now be who I really was. I was regretful that I wasn't the person that somebody else wanted me to be, and that speaks volumes about my mental state at the time. It was a tough process getting used to. Not only getting used to being who I really was, because I didn't really change outwardly. I just admitted what I'd known all along and was the same person as I ever was. But the main difficulty was from being in that sort of safety net of a relationship to talking to someone and knowing someone from day to day. Suddenly that stopping, and then you've suddenly changed your burden of carrying a repressed sexuality around with you to a burden of you've broken someone's heart, and it's something that I eventually started coming to terms with in the last few years. And myself and the woman that I'm with, we don't speak anymore. We don't necessarily have ill will towards each other, just that she wanted to move on, and to make that easier for her meant that she couldn't speak to me, and that's entirely fair. I don't blame her for this. I think she's very justified in fact, because I turned out to not be the person that she needed, and she spent 5 years with me just as I'd spent 5 years with her, and all of a sudden that ended, and she had to be the one to do that because I wasn't brave enough to do it myself. So after their relationship ended and I was suddenly sort of lost again, I didn't throw myself into dating straight away, to be honest. I tried sort of half-heartedly and had short-term relationships and flings and trysts, but I wasn't comfortable enough with myself as a person at the time. I hadn't taken the time to be able to like myself before I could like somebody else, and that was a difficult thing to do, because I validated my life at certain points by being the person that someone else wanted to spend time with and that someone else likes. I sort of justified my existence by, this person likes me and therefore I must be worth something, as opposed to being myself and proving my own worth to myself. I was proving it via I can't think of the right word, but I was being validated. That's the one. I was validating myself by other people's want to be around me, and hadn't learnt to enjoy who I was at that point. And so after a while, I started sort of getting more used to it, and the sort of general feeling of otherness hasn't necessarily gone away around certain people. I get the feeling that a lot of people were very disappointed when I came out. Most people who I know were really pleased for, well, not really pleased, but they were happy that I had realised probably what some people have known for a long time. I'm not going to lie. I'm even though I'm not the most effeminate of gay men, as you, I'm also not the most manly of men. I wasn't someone who represented either stereotype, to be honest. But people said that they'd known for a while, and like a lot of people probably knew before I knew for certain, to be fair. And that brings me to a couple of years ago when I was very lonely, to be honest, when after the relationship ended and after I first came out, because all of a sudden it was a massive life change, of course, because I now had that missing relationship, and that wasn't helped, of course, by the lockdown, the COVID lockdown at the start of 2020. I felt very lonely and isolated, as a lot of people did, for both reasons. Being the lockdown brought with it its own anxieties, of course, but those who have had similar experiences will know what I say, how much of a sort of lonely existence it is. When you're on your own for the first time in a while and you can't really remember what it was like before. And I was on all the usual dating sites. I was on Grindr for a while, which I don't recommend. Grindr is as Obi-Wan Kenobi would say, a wretched hive of scum and villainy. As I found out through my experiences on there, it's not a place where you generally go to meet nice people. But anyway, I did end up meeting a nice person. In the tail end of the first lockdown, I started talking to a man who I'm still with, a man who I live with, a man who I engage with, who I want to marry, spend the rest of my life with, have children. And it all happened at a time when I least expected it, as these things often do. My partner, who I will name because he won't mind, because he's probably going to be on this podcast one day, he's called Connor. He lived sort of an hour away from me. I drove at the time. This was before I lost my eyesight, or most of my eyesight, I should say. So after we had a few really great dates, and it was going really well. The only really thing that kept us apart was the distance, because he lived an hour away and he also worked a job with difficult rota times, so we saw each other whenever we can. And the first thing I realised when we got sort of deep into this relationship was being with Connor was the first time I felt happy being myself, and being with him is the first time that made me realise that I was happy to be myself, and I could be myself around him. I wasn't hiding anything. I wasn't behind any sort of wall. I wasn't putting up any sort of resistance to something that I knew deep down. I was just with him because that's who I was supposed to be, and he's the person I'm supposed to be with. And after about 6 months of dating and seeing each other sort of semi-regularly, a couple of times a month if we could manage it, I moved over to live with him in an hour away in West Yorkshire. I'm from the east side, the better side of Yorkshire, and I moved over there, got a job as a teaching assistant, a job which I had to leave again when I lost my eyesight. And when that did happen, Connor was amazing and still is. He carried on going to work to make sure that we still had a roof over our heads. He was my shoulder to cry on when I had so much sort of doubt and unknowing, because it took them so long to tell me what was wrong, and to tell me that my eyesight had gone and it wasn't coming back. And Connor was perfect, shoulder to cry on, just the best person to be around and help me through it. And then to help me live life a bit more independently, we moved back to East Yorkshire. Connor uprooted his life, found a new job in East Yorkshire. We moved back in with my parents for a while, which is a bit of a tight squeeze, and then we found our own place, which we now live, and we live very happily. And I'm not going to lie, it's still difficult to be blind when you once had vision, but Connor makes things that much easier just by being around to support and helping me around the house and things like that. He's not the only person, of course. My parents, who let us move back in, the both of us gave us a place to stay and put food on the table for us for 3 months. They help as well, and this is sort of the happy end to my story, is that this and hopefully most people who I talk to will have a happy end. Or at least I hope that most of the people that I speak to will have this sort of level of comfort in who they are and what they've done. I found who I was meant to be and who I was meant to be with in circumstances that were less than ideal, but I got there in the end. And yeah, this is really difficult for me because I'm not generally a person that is overly eager to speak about themselves, as you, the listener, can probably tell by my slightly awkward delivery of some of this, is because I'm generally quite a quiet and private person, but I came to the point, but I'm at the point now where I know who I am, I'm happy with who I am, and I'm in an extraordinarily excellent relationship with a man who I love. I don't think that would have been possible for me even 5 years ago now, even like before my previous relationship, because I still was happy with myself and I still hadn't come to terms with who I was, and that was the important part as to why it now works, because I've found someone who I can be happy with and who I can be myself around, someone who I don't have to put up a facade for when I'm around them, and that's what I had always wanted, and I hope that those who I speak to on this podcast will have the same sort of ending to their story, or if not exactly the same, then I hope that the stories that we tell will give people hope that there is and there can be a happy ending for people, and even if they've suffered any different number of difficulties, like I'm fully aware that what I suffered wasn't the worst of things by any stretch of the imaginations, but my experiences are valid too, and that's why I wanted to share them, because I want to give people the confidence to share their own story and be able to say that how they feel is valid and what they've experienced is valid, and that's my story, and I hope that this helps people who listen. I hope that the stories that we'll tell over the coming podcasts will help people realise that it's not just them that are going through these experiences at the moment. It's happened to a lot of us across decades, if not hundreds of years. People have grappled with their own inner self-worth and their identities and this is what this podcast is about. It's about helping people find their happiness in their identities and letting them know that their experiences are their own, and their experiences are valid and make them who they are, and to hopefully one day will get them their happy ending. And I hope that whoever's listening to this will also find their happy ending. You are loved, you are valid, and I hope this podcast will help, and I hope to be of support and help to anyone I can be. So that's your introduction to the Rainbow Club. I'll be back again soon talking to a good friend of mine who listeners of my old podcast, the Major Film Reviews podcast, will be familiar with. The lovely Angel Luciani Ruloffs, who is going to talk to us about their identity, their story, and I can't wait to hear it, and I can't wait for you guys to hear it. So I hope you enjoyed this listen, and I hope you will join me again soon when I talk to Luciani about their experiences. So until next time, look after yourselves. This has been the Rainbow Club, and I've been Nathan Major. Talk to you soon.